On a cold spring morning in Briar Hollow, the last frost still clung to fence posts, and the wind smelled of wet soil and pine. That's when Officer Daniel Reeves' K-9 partner, Juno, caught a scent in the woods behind the Harper property, a trail nobody had noticed in 12 long years. The dog moved with urgency, pawing through bramble and mud until she stopped at an old, overgrown well sealed with rusted steel plate. When they unbolted it, what rose from the dark left the Harper family in stunned silence and brought a buried nightmare back into daylight. Stories like this one come from real places, real feelings. If you want more haunting rural mysteries, consider following this channel. It helps us bring you stories that stay with you. The Harper property sat 2 miles past the county line, where the asphalt road ended in gravel and the old-growth trees swallowed the sky. It was a quiet place, not much traffic, not much noise, just a hum of bugs and the tall grass and the distant bark of coyotes when night fell. The Harper family had lived there for decades, but no one had stepped foot near the abandoned guest house since the summer of 2012. Not since 13-year-old Sophie Harper vanished without a trace. Officer Daniel Reeve remembered that summer well. He'd been a rookie back then, fresh out of the academy, one of the first to take Sophie's missing persons report. Her mother, Lillian Harper, had stood on the porch with tear-streaked cheeks. Clutching Sophie's pink hoodie like a lifeline, Daniel had walked the woods himself, knocking on every door within a 10-mile radius. They brought in dogs, choppers, divers. Nothing. Sophie had simply vanished. No body. No sign of struggle. Just gone. Now, 12 years later, Daniel was older, slower, and more cautious, but he still carried the case with him. He never closed her file. Not really. And then Juno, his black and tan German shepherd, trained in scent detection, started acting strange. It began 3 weeks ago during a routine property sweep. They'd been helping animal control search for a mountain lion spotted near the tree line behind the Harper place. Juno veered off trail without command, nose low, ears pinned. She circled a patch of dense blackberry bramble and began whining. "Juno!" Daniel called softly, stepping over roots and moss. "Heel!" But she didn't. Instead, she crouched, paw at the base of a twisted cedar, then looked back at Daniel with something urgent in her eyes. Something unsettled. That night, Daniel barely slept. He pulled Sophie's case folder from his desk drawer, ran his fingers over the brittle photographs, the yellowed missing posters. His mind turned circles. It was just a patch of woods. The dog could have picked up anything, a rabbit, a deer, old food wrappers. But something gnawed at him, a feeling. 2 mornings later, Juno did it again. Same spot, same urgency. Daniel reported the behavior to the department, and Sheriff Kimball, a stoic, tired man with a long memory, signed off on a formal search. Not a full-scale operation, but enough to send 2 officers with shovels and tape. Daniel asked for local permission to check the outbuildings on the Harper land. Lillian Harper gave her quiet consent with a tired nod. "I doubt you'll find anything," she said, eyes hollow from years of grief. "But if you think it's worth looking..." The first search turned up nothing. The woods were thick with rotten brush, and the shed by the back ravine had collapsed under its own weight. But Juno kept pulling toward one specific direction, a long, forgotten stretch of grass near the old guest house. The air there felt different. Still, too still. That's when Daniel saw it. A circular outline in the dirt, half covered by moss and pine needles. It looked like an old well, the kind used back in the 30s when the Harpers ran a logging business from property. The lid was sealed with a rusted metal plate and 2 bolts. Not new, but not ancient either. Daniel called it in. Deputy Shaw arrived within an hour with a battery-powered saw and a pry bar. They unsealed the plate slowly, careful not to damage what might be inside. As the final bolt gave way, the thick iron lid groaned open. A gust of cold, earthy air surged upward from the shaft, damp, fetid, ancient. Juno backed away, growling low. Daniel aimed his flashlight into the darkness. The beam vanished down a narrow tunnel of brick and shadow. "There's something down there," he muttered. They lowered a camera on a cable, inch by inch, watching the grainy screen inside the patrol SUV. At first it showed only brick walls and clumps of spiderweb. Then something shifted. A scrap of cloth caught on a hook. Beneath it, a shape. Then another. Bones. Human. Sheriff Kimball stood at the edge of the woods, arms crossed, staring into nothing. He didn't speak for a long time. "Secure the perimeter," he said finally. "We treat this as a crime scene." The news spread through Briar Hollow before sunset. Reporters showed up the next morning, uninvited. But no one knew for sure, not yet, whose bones they were. Not until forensics came back. Not until the DNA was tested. Still, Daniel had a gut feeling. He always had. The Harper family stayed inside their farmhouse, curtains drawn. Lillian didn't cry when Daniel told her they'd found remains. She just nodded and whispered, "Please, tell me when you know for sure." The forensics team recovered 3 skeletons in total. All female, all aged between 10 and 14. Only one matched the DNA they had on file. Sophie Harper. The other 2 were unknown. By the time the sun set behind the treetops on the 4th day, Briar Hollow was no longer quiet. And Daniel knew they weren't dealing with a missing persons case anymore. They were dealing with a killer, a patient one, and possibly someone who still lived nearby. By Thursday morning, the Harper land was taped off with yellow lines, the kind that fluttered in the wind like warning flags. A generator buzzed low near the well as forensics continued recovering small, heartbreaking items: a faded plastic barrette, a threadbare stuffed rabbit, a pink rubber sandal that had been flattened under time and weight. Daniel stood beside Sheriff Kimball, watching the specialist move with slow, reverent care. Every piece was bagged and tagged, every movement recorded. No one spoke louder than a murmur. 3 girls, Kimball muttered, chewing on the inside of his cheek. And only one ID'd so far. Daniel nodded. Sophie and 2 unknowns. Jesus. Kimball looked out across the property. Makes you wonder what else is buried around here. Daniel didn't answer. His mind was back in 2012. Sophie Harper had been bright, curious, always asking questions. She used to wave when Daniel drove by. She'd been close with her cousin, Emma, who had since moved 3 states away after the tragedy shattered the family. Emma had never really spoken about Sophie's disappearance. Some things were too sharp to touch. What about that second skeleton? Daniel asked quietly. The one with the heel fracture? Forensics says the tibia was broken years before death. Doctor thinks it was a spiral fracture. Likely abuse. Kimball's jaw tensed. Whoever she was, she suffered. That afternoon, Daniel drove back into town, down the familiar streets of Briar Hollow. Kids played hopscotch outside the schoolhouse. A dog barked behind a picket fence. Life went on, but in the silence behind it all, something old had cracked open. The town was remembering. Whispers, glances, half-forgotten rumors resurfacing like driftwood after a storm. He stopped at the diner for coffee. The waitress, Carol, leaned in with a look that said she already knew. "Hard week, huh?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "People are saying it's that drifter from the fair," she whispered. "The one who worked the Tilt-A-Whirl." Daniel frowned. That was years ago. Exactly. He'd heard the story before. A man in his 40s, traveled with the seasonal fair, stayed in a trailer out near the river bend. People said he gave candy to kids, that he'd been fired for creeping around the rides after hours. But nothing had ever been proven. No arrest, no charge, just rumors. Still, Daniel wrote it down. By the next morning, forensics returned a partial match on one of the 2 unknown girls. A Jane Doe reported missing in 2011 from 2 counties over. Name, Claire Mendel. Age, 12. She disappeared while walking home from swim practice. No one had ever connected her to Sophie. No one had thought to. Daniel sat in his patrol SUV, staring at the printout in silence. This wasn't coincidence. This was planned, methodical, a hunter's pattern. Girls between 10 and 13, snatched without struggle, dumped in a sealed location no one would stumble across. A grave disguised as history. He drove back to the Harper property. The well was still open, surrounded by orange cones and equipment. Juno paced beside it, ears perked, anxious. "Something still bothering you, girl?" he whispered, running a hand along her side. She darted toward the guest house, the one that had been padlocked since 2012. Juno stopped at the side wall, sniffing hard, then scratching at the wooden siding. Daniel followed. The guest house hadn't been searched yet. It wasn't part of the main residence, and the door was still sealed. He grabbed the bolt cutters from his trunk. Inside, the air was thick with mold and rot. A mattress leaned against one wall, moth-eaten and slumped. Dust layered every surface. Juno growled low and pointed her snout toward the corner cabinet. Daniel opened it. Inside, beneath a stack of crumbling books, was a small metal lunchbox. Rusted shut, he pried it open with a screwdriver. Inside were photographs, Polaroids, dozens. Each one showed a girl. Most of them were sleeping. Some were not. Daniel dropped the box and staggered back. He grabbed his radio. "Sheriff, I need you at the guest house. Now." The images were confirmed later that night. 12 different girls. Only 2 confirmed as Claire and Sophie. That meant 10 more Jane does. Possibly victims. Possibly alive. The case had just turned from cold to wildfire. But what disturbed Daniel the most wasn't the photos. It was the handwriting on the back of one picture. She liked the purple ones best. The way they wilted made her laugh. Beneath that, a date, July 12, 2009, 3 years before Sophie vanished. It was signed with one initial, just an R. Daniel stayed up half the night, combing through every file he had. Anyone in town with an R initial, men who'd lived near the Harperland, contractors, guests, former workers. And then something clicked, something from utility records. The guest house had electric service restored in 2011. The request was submitted under the name R. Langford. Daniel stared at the record. Raymond Langford, a handyman who'd worked on properties around town. Quiet, soft-spoken, drove a tan Dodge pickup. Disappeared in 2013, not long after Sophie went missing. No one had followed up. No one had connected the name to anything criminal. He just stopped showing up. Moved out, people assumed. Daniel's heart thudded in his ears. If Raymond Langford had been using the guest house, and he'd sealed that well, then the man they were looking for had walked these woods, used these roads, laughed with neighbors. He might have been at the church BBQs, helped hang Christmas lights, and someone had let him in. That someone might still be here. Rain came the next morning. A steady, cold drizzle that turned the roads to slick ribbons and made the trees weep mud down their trunks. The Harper property sat half submerged in fog, the kind that distorted distances and swallowed sound. Nothing moved but the tape, fluttering like ghost-thin fingers in the wind. Daniel parked just inside the gate and stepped out, his boots sinking into the gravel. Juno followed close behind, alert but silent. Inside the command tent, Sheriff Kimball was on the phone with the state task force. His jaw clenched tighter with every word. They want the photos cataloged and sealed. Chain of custody airtight. He hung up and looked at Daniel. They're sending 2 agents from Topeka. It's a serial investigation now. Daniel nodded, his eyes dark. "I think I know where he lived," he said. Kimball's eyes sharpened. "Langford?" "Yeah, out near Maple Creek Road. Old single wide behind a feed store. County records say it was foreclosed in 2015. Then why the hell didn't we check it before?" "Because it was listed under a shell name, M. Reeve." Kimball blinked. "Wait, Reeve? You think he was using your name?" Daniel said nothing. "I don't know if it was a message or a coincidence, but someone used my name to hide that trailer." They arrived an hour later. 2 cruisers, quiet lights, weapons holstered but hands resting easy on hips. The trailer sat where the woods began to thicken, slumped under its own roofline, half-eaten by kudzu. The front steps were gone, the windows boarded. No sign of forced entry, but no sign of escape either. Juno began whining before they stepped onto porch. Not fear, not excitement. Something like confusion. Daniel drew his sidearm. They went in slow. Inside, the air was foul. Mold, wet paper, the stink of rats. Flashlights cut across stacked newspapers, rusted utensils, clothes that hadn't been moved in over a decade. But beneath the rot, there was something else, a sense of stillness, as if no one had breathed here in a long, long time. Daniel's light landed on the living room wall. Photographs again, hundreds of them, taped and pinned, overlapping. Some were Polaroids, some torn from magazines, others taken from yearbooks. Girls, always girls, ages 10 to 14, some in parks, some in school uniforms, some candid, unaware they were being watched. But near the center of the wall was a larger photo, not of a girl, of a woman. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It was Lillian Harper, Sophie's mother, young, maybe 19, holding baby Sophie. On the back wall was a calendar, marked only once, a single red circle around a date. Next Friday. What the hell was he planning? Kimball whispered. Daniel stepped into the back hallway. The floor creaked under his weight. At the end of the corridor was a locked door. Juno stood in front of it, tail rigid. Daniel pried it open. Inside was a narrow room with thick black plastic lining the walls. A mattress, a camera on a tripod, a roll of duct tape, chains. Kimball cursed under his breath. He was prepping to start again. Daniel stared at the chains. He never stopped. That night, the news broke nationally. A suspected serial predator operating undetected for over a decade. 3 confirmed victims. 10 more possibly linked. And now, a connection to law enforcement through a falsified name. But in Briar Hollow, the damage went deeper. Because as the FBI agents interviewed residents and reviewed witness statements, one strange thing stood out. Someone had signed off on the original power reconnection to the Harper Guest House in 2011. A signature was found on the approval form. It belonged to a county official, Cameron Leary, a code inspector. He had retired in 2016, moved just outside town. When they questioned him, Cameron denied knowing Raymond Langford, said he signed hundreds of those forms. Didn't remember this one. But when they searched his home, they found a shoe, a girl's shoe, identical to the pair Claire Mendel wore the day she disappeared. Cameron was arrested that night, but Daniel didn't feel victorious, because it wasn't just Langford. It had never been just one man. Langford had hunted, but someone had covered for him, made space, helped him hide, maybe out of fear, maybe for money, maybe for darker reasons. And someone else, or maybe more than one, had looked the other way. The next morning, Lillian Harper came to the well. She stood beside Daniel, wrapped in her shawl, silent for a long time. The early sun broke through the trees, spilling gold across the grass. Her eyes didn't move. "We used to tell Sophie not to go near the old guest house," she said finally. "She'd sneak there anyway," said it felt like a secret. Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "She trusted people too easily," Lillian whispered. "I didn't do enough," Daniel said quietly. "I missed something. I should have." Lillian touched his arm, not in forgiveness, just presence. "You looked," she said. "You never stopped looking. That's more than most." Juno stood at the edge of the clearing, nose tilted upward, catching the wind. Daniel watched her for a while, his hands deep in his coat pockets. "She brought us here," he said softly. They resealed the well that afternoon, not as a grave, but as a marker, the names of the 3 known girls carved into a stone beside it, a place to remember what was stolen and what was finally brought home. A week later, Emma, Sophie's cousin, returned to Briar Hollow. She placed a ribbon on the fence. Purple, Sophie's favorite. In the end, there were no grand answers, no closure that erased what had happened. But there was truth, and truth had weight. It filled the space where questions once lived. Sometimes justice doesn't roar. Sometimes it arrives quietly, led by a dog who refused to look away. The wind moved gently through the trees at spring, rustling the leaves like whispered apologies. The Harper land healed slow. The guest house was torn down. A small garden was planted near the stone marker, tended by quiet hands and watched over by a loyal K-9 with graying fur. Officer Reeves stayed on the force, though something in his eyes changed. And each year, on the anniversary, a ribbon appeared. Purple, soft as breath. Proof that even after darkness, after silence, after betrayal, memory remains.